That was the reality I grew up in a refugee camp, which was and is filled with mental illnesses, ongoing conflict. So I grew up hearing bombs and gunfire from time to time. And there are people who like were killed intentionally or accidentally. And somehow we got used to listening to those bombs and ongoing shootings. It became a normal part in my life.
Thank you so much for being here today, Zoya. I'm so inspired by you. I would love to start out just by asking about your life in Switzerland now, because I know you've had many transitions over the past few years. But I was just wondering how life has been now in Switzerland as compared to where you've been before.
Thank you so much, Mary, for the introduction. So I've been living in Switzerland for the past 2 years and a half, and I think it shaped me in so many ways. I love life here. I remember when I first came to Switzerland, I thought to myself, wow, like this is a place which I hopefully one day am able to call home. Because for so long, I was questioning myself, like, what is home? What is home to me, or where is my home? Because of my story, basically growing up in Lebanon and then moving to Ukraine and now in Switzerland. And I felt that when I came to Switzerland, I thought to myself, like, wow, this is a country that one day I could call home. Yeah, and I'm in the process of working on that.
Yeah, Switzerland is so beautiful. I've never experienced a country like so gorgeous as Switzerland. Like my boyfriend lives here. I'm actually here now for 2 months. I just feel this sense of safety that I've never felt anywhere else. It's just such a beautiful country.
This is what we were looking for because, like, also like with our realities in Lebanon and then Ukraine, and also our background, like being Palestinians as well. The first thing that came into our mind was this like Maslow law of like hierarchy of needs, and we thought to ourselves like we need a country where we can find safety and security. And thankfully, we have this today. Like we have this in Switzerland. I always say like part of my family because at the time my father and brother stayed in Lebanon when we moved to Ukraine, and escaping the war from Ukraine to Switzerland, it was my mom and my little siblings, Sandy and Karim. So it has always been like part of the family here, part of the family there. That's our reality.
I'm so glad that you have family with you here and you're not here alone. I think that's really special to still be with them. I was curious how like moving around has shaped your perspective of what it means to have a home and how you've maybe adapted the definition.
Yeah, for so long I was questioning. I had this question like growing up because I never honestly like I grew up as a Palestinian in Lebanon and now I'm a Ukrainian in Switzerland. And honestly, like I never really felt home in Lebanon. Because like as Palestinian, I wasn't able like to work or own anything, so we have these restrictions, and I felt like I cannot call this place fully my home. Now I do have this nostalgic feelings towards Lebanon. I love Lebanon, but I don't consider it like fully my home. And same for like Palestine. Like as a Palestinian refugee growing up in Lebanon, we are not allowed even to visit Palestine. So I cannot say that this is my home. I wish I could go there and visit it and then call it home. But also like I've never felt that it is my home because we're not allowed to go there. And Ukraine, I haven't lived like a long time in Ukraine. And then I always had this question of home. And what I reached today, like now I can say that home is something that I carry within myself, and wherever I go, I just take it with me. So, and I feel like for someone who escaped two wars and became like twice a refugee, I think like this is the safest understanding of a home because now I can say that yes, home is within me, and I just take it with me wherever I go because we don't have this external stability, but I can build something within myself that could stay with me wherever I go. So that's where my home is.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's amazing that you're able to find that within yourself. And speaking of growing up in the refugee camp in Lebanon, would you just be able to touch on what that was like for you and maybe just some of those memories early on? And again, you don't have to like share everything, just whatever you feel comfortable sharing, of course.
Yeah, I grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. It's called Ain al Halwa. It's the largest Palestinian refugee camp there. It was built after 1948, after like the Nakba, what we call Palestinians catastrophe, in which the Palestinians were forced by the Israelis to leave Palestine. And my grandfather at the time left to Lebanon with his family, and they settled in this refugee camp, Ain al Halwe. And throughout the years, it was growing and growing, and it became overpopulated. And that was the reality I grew up in a refugee camp, which was and is filled with mental illnesses, ongoing conflicts. So I grew up hearing bombs and gunfire from time to time, and we would also know that there are people who like were killed intentionally or accidentally, and somehow we got used to listening to those bombs and ongoing shootings. And I reached a point in which like I just got used to that. It became a normal part in my life. But at the same time, like I was struggling there because I grew up there like with my family. We were 7 members and we lived in a single room for the first 15 years of my life. And to me, that was a huge struggle because I never felt that I have a space for me, like a, a space where I could consider like that's my space or where I could express myself freely. We always like lived just collectively. That was my reality. And at the same time, I went into like a school just outside of the refugee camp. And there I was really ashamed to tell my school friends that I come from a refugee camp. So I remember when everyone like was afraid of their school grades, I was really worried of one single question, the question of like, where do you live? Where's your home? And that question would directly just terrify me because that means that I need to really tell everyone that I live in this refugee camp, and yet alone telling them that I live in a single room with my whole family. So that was the reality I was living in this like overpopulated place. And at the same time, for example, in that single room, we only had one window. Like that was basically my way of looking out into the world. And even if you put your hand outside of that window, you could touch the other building. So to that extent, like that's how overcrowded it was. Um, and at the age of 15, I remember like again there were ongoing clashes and our house was burned, was completely consumed by fire because the house next to us was bombed. And so because of the gas, our house got burned completely and we lost everything at the time. I remember having this little memory box, like that was something that I owned. It was my thing, my space. I remember having like family pictures in it, childhood pictures as well, and it was also like burned basically. And I remember like that was the first thing that I got sad about, like my memory box. But also the weird thing was our reaction. Like as a family, I remember like we were visiting my grandparents in Ukraine, and I remember my father calling us and telling us like our house got burned. And our first reaction as well was like, oh, thanks God. At the same time, like we knew that our family was safe, everyone was alive, we did not lose anyone. But then that was a reaction that is also alarming, like saying thanks God our house got burned. That was because like we were struggling to live there, and our house getting burned meant that we could finally live outside of the refugee camp. So that was our reality. And I also remember as a child, like at some point studying in the bathroom, that was something I was really ashamed of. I couldn't tell anyone me studying in the bathroom. At the same time, I knew like one day like I was still hopeful. Like despite that reality I was living in, I was imagining myself that one day I'm gonna grow older, I'm gonna stand there confidently, say that yes, I came from a refugee camp, I come from a refugee camp, and yet I'm proud of myself for fighting for my education and so on. And also I remember myself like in that reality, I always wanted to be the human carrying the message of love and peace because that was something that I was missing. That was something, a reality that I didn't get to enjoy. And I thought to myself, like, this is the message I want to bring to the world.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry to hear about that, Zoya. That's like I can't even imagine what that must be like, and so just so tragic that that's the way you grew up, and so many people are living and still are living now. Like I'm at a loss of words, just how like sad it is. I'm so sorry that that's how you were raised, but I'm really, like, fascinated by how you were able to have that mentality, especially at such a young age, to have this mentality of hope and wanting to break through and inspire people. Like, I don't understand, like, where that came from within you, if your parents, were always hopeful, and you just, as a kid, just knew, like, "One day I'm going to, like, be a warrior and help people and get over this." But yeah, I'm just so sorry that that's how you grew up, but, oh, like, just don't know what to say.
I think it's my mom. Like I always say that, and maybe my mom doesn't believe that, but she is really the source of this positivity and so much like inner power, inner strength. Growing up, I used to think like, oh my God, my mom is definitely miserable, like a Ukrainian woman growing, like raising her children in a refugee camp in a single room. And when our house got burned and we moved out of the refugee camp, I asked my mom, like, Mom, now that we have left the refugee camp, what do you think about the refugee camp? And like her answer really inspired me because she said that, you know what? Like, I found my freedom there. And I was like, how? Like, how could you find freedom in a community with so much violence and ongoing clashes and so on? And she told me, like, I found the community there. Like, she found love there. Despite all of the violence, she found that people were there for each other. Whenever something bad was happening to you, you would always find people around you. And there was this sense of collectiveness, this power of collective living, and that really liberated me because as a child growing up, like all what you want is your parents to be happy, basically. And when my mom was able to look at the past and see it in this way, like look at it from this attitude, have this attitude about the refugee camp, it really liberated so many parts inside of me. And I think that is the spirit that I carry today as well.
I definitely think that goes to show just I guess that you can be optimistic in a way, like that no matter what physical situation that you're going through, there's always, like you said, love to be found. I think that is a powerful, really powerful message, especially coming from someone that really didn't have really much at all physically.
It's so funny, like even like we lived in this single room and we would always invite my mom would always invite her Ukrainian friends. And they would always say that we don't know how like you live in a single room and yet we feel the house is so big. And I think like it's because my mom filled it with so much love that like the people whoever came to that house, to that single room, felt that the house is being somehow elongated. And that's because of the love that my mom spread with like spread to the world, basically to the world around her. And despite that childhood, it's also like it's important to mention that I also had a good childhood. Like, yes, I had like this difficult part in my childhood, but the way I look at it and the way I see it is like I remember my mom singing like and playing the guitar and all of us around her singing together. So it's also like I see it in that way. It's not like I look at it in a very bad way and that's my reality and oh my god, it's like, hey, I also have really good memories with mom singing and us like singing around her. So that was also part of that reality.
I think it's wonderful to share that message with people of where you find meaning in your life. And like, no matter what you're going through, there's always going to be love and beautiful moments. Like, at the end of the day, what really matters is the people you're with, giving people love, and like you said, giving people a space to just be themselves. And yeah, I think it's really a beautiful message that you have. So, speaking of, when you moved to Switzerland, you've started Waves to Home, and you're also one young world peace ambassador. Could you share about your journey from Ukraine to Switzerland?
Yes. So before I moved to Ukraine, like we were living in Lebanon, and in 2021, the situation in Lebanon was getting worse with the COVID and also the economic crisis. And we also had the Beirut explosion, which killed like more than 2,200 people in Lebanon. And we decided that, hey, we need safety, we need security. We're moving to Ukraine. We moved to Ukraine. I had solo traveling and like I did solo trip in around Europe in 5 different countries, and that was like a dream of mine coming true. And at the time, I was also questioning like this question of home. What is home to me? And what I did at the time, I wrote down on like in my journal about who I wanted to become as a human, and I always carry my journal with me. And there, I wrote that I wanted to become like a storyteller, a peace ambassador, an author, like a refugees activist and someone who's fighting for human rights and so on. And I thought like that's gonna happen one day later on in life. Little did I know what was waiting for me, like when I moved to Switzerland. And like I managed to live like in Ukraine less than a year, back in 2021, 2022, until the war started in Ukraine. I remember my mom entering the room and telling me like, "Hey, Zoya, wake up! The war had started." I was shocked at the time. It just didn't make sense because how come would it make sense that we just moved into Ukraine, our safe space, our safe haven, and now a war again starting in Ukraine? Like, how did that make sense? But I remember like we didn't have much time to really reflect on our emotions or to acknowledge what was going on. We just knew that, hey, I have little siblings. I needed to make sure that they are safe. Um, because we know how it feels to escape a war and how it feels to really like listen to the bombs and be in that atmosphere, because we already escaped the war back in 2006 when there was a war between Lebanon and Israel. And at the time we escaped the war to Ukraine, so we went to Ukraine as our safe space, and we got used to having Ukraine as our safe haven. Whenever something bad is happening in Lebanon, then Ukraine is the space. um so yeah, it was my second time escaping a war in my lifetime by the age of 22. And I remember like it wasn't easy to escape like from Ukraine to Poland. We were afraid at any moment that we would get bombed because we know from our past experiences, we know all of this. And I remember when we were in the train, we were in a cabin that's meant for like 2 to 4 people. We were 12 people there squeezed together, 8 children, 4 adults. And I remember like in that confined space, my mom looked at me and said like, Zoya, we should sing. And in that space, I felt like my mom telling me like with other Ukrainian refugees that we should sing, and we did sing. Like we sang Ukrainian folk songs, and with each song like I felt my resilience and our resilience collectively was growing stronger. And I thought to myself like, now I carry this internal freedom within myself. Not even a war could take it away from me. And I promised myself at the time that if we make it out alive, if I make it out alive out of Ukraine, like, I refuse to become the victim I was once back in Lebanon as a Palestinian refugee, hiding behind my reality. And instead, I would become a warrior and a fighter. And that is what I felt like. And it's also very interestingly, like, I felt the most alive when we were near death. I felt that, hey, no, I am so much alive. No one can take that spirit away from me. So we came to Switzerland, and I remember we were hosted by a Swiss family for around 4 months. And around during dinner time, I remember their oldest daughter told me, Ellen, told me like, Zoya, you've got a powerful story. You need to share it with the world. And I was like, definitely not. And that's how my storytelling journey basically started. I started sharing my story in different schools, high schools, different like newspapers and church. And I really wanted to inspire other people to talk about refugees, to tell the world that we are not like we are victims of war, but we refuse to be victims in life. And all of the stereotypes that people have about refugees, I wanted to challenge those stereotypes. And in that process of me trying to inspire others, I found myself being inspired in the process. I found that um, when I let the pain outside into the world, when I get rid of that pain, somehow, like, I'm able to change the story I tell myself, about my life. And the way you narrate your own story to yourself before you share it with the world, that's how you change your life forever. And this is how, like, storytelling on a personal level had really healed so many parts within myself. And I thought to myself, like, hey, as a child, I always wanted to be the human carrying that message of peace and love. And I really wanted to finally become a peace ambassador, like escaping 2 wars, 2 times a refugee. It's like, hey, it's the time. And I remember, like, I went to Google and I wrote, like, how to become a peace ambassador, just like that. And I came across this One Young World Peace Ambassador scholarship. And I really cared about, like, the peace ambassador part. And I didn't know much about One Young World. Um, And funny enough, like a few months later, I received this email from Winning World that I got accepted to go to like Manchester, UK for this global summit. And it was also like a dream of mine to be part of this like a global community around the world. So I go there, and I didn't know that One Young World would eventually change my life. And I did go there. I met other refugees from different parts of the world. I saw how people were expressing their stories and talking about embracing their own stories, talking about their own pain and journey, and how they use that pain in order to create like action in the world, in order to create that change. And it came to my mind like, that is the role that I want to have in life. Like, I want to create something beautiful out of and despite the traumas that we could go through, despite my pain and through my pain, I want to create this beautiful impact for the world. And that's how I became like a peace ambassador, and that's how my journey with Waves to Home started. Because I remember, like, instead of going like to party, we decided, like, as delegates from different countries, we were like from Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. We decided to come together and talk about our stories. And in that time, when we shared our stories to like among each other, I felt this connection. I felt this belonging, and we were also exploring this question of home. And in that time, I felt this the beauty of collective storytelling. So, on a personal level, I had already discovered this personal power of storytelling. And now, in this sharing circle, I discovered like the power of collective storytelling. And when I came back to Switzerland after the global summit, I decided that that magic that we felt together, in which where we felt true belonging, we need to bring it to the world. And that's how Waves to Home started at the time.
Zora, thank you for sharing all of this. You're such a amazing person. I remember before you were saying that you were ashamed of your story and you wanted to hide it from people. Like when did it change from being you were ashamed of it to when you were proud and, resilient?
I think like that point in which everything changed, I think it's escaping the war in Ukraine, like, and realizing that like this is my reality, escaping two wars, becoming twice a refugee. And it's like it's not a choice I made. It's like what life gave me. I couldn't do anything about it. And like escaping the war for the second time, I thought to myself, like, hey, I don't want to be that victim in life again. Like, I refuse to be a victim in life. It's like I do recognize and I acknowledge that yes, we are victims of war, and but I refuse to become a victim in life again. So the transition of like escaping the war in Ukraine and feeling that death was near us at any point, we would have gotten bombed as well, for example. So in those moments, I felt like, hey, no, I'm not gonna allow this to happen again, and I need to change that how I perceive my own story. And also, like, I do remember, like, when I lived with a Swiss family, um, there was a woman working at the time in that house. Her name is Laura, and I used to have like she is actually my first like my first. She's from Ireland, but she has been living in Switzerland for a long time. And I remember like I would tell my friends like, "Hey, I finally have like a friend in Switzerland other than my like Swiss family. I have a friend." And she was like at the time I was 22, she was like maybe 63 years old, and she was my first friend. So we used to talk about like psychology, philosophy, healing, and so on. And I remember at one point she gave me a book. It was called The Gift, by Edith Edger, who is a Holocaust survivor. And she gave me this book and she told me, Zoya, you need to read it. And it was about the journey of Edith, who was at the time maybe 9 or 8 years old when she went to Auschwitz. And she survived with her older sister, but at the time, both of her parents were killed. And it was very inspiring reading her story because when I escaped the war in Ukraine and went to Poland, I also went to Auschwitz. I felt the need to go there, and at the time, like I went there, I saw pictures of like little children hanging on the wall. And I was wondering like how did the world allow this to happen? What type of propaganda allowed this to happen? Because I know that the same propaganda is now allowing the genocide in Gaza, for example, to happen, or in Lebanon, or now like the ongoing war in Ukraine, for example, happening. So and then I go to Switzerland, and then I read this story about this girl and how she changed the way she perceived her own story. And she said in her book that it's not about what happens to us, but rather how we choose to look at what happens to us. So at the time, like back in One Young World, I met many refugees from different parts of the world, from Brazil, from also like from Palestine, from Syria, Lebanon, different countries in the world. And when I came back to Switzerland, I thought like, hey, the magic that we felt there at the time, we need to bring it to the world. And so I started like reconnecting with everyone I met back in One Young World, and I was sharing with them my vision. And because like I felt this power of storytelling in my own story, I thought like, why wouldn't we create these safe spaces for people in order for them to find the space to re-narrate their own stories and reframe their own stories from a warrior perspective instead of them seeing their own stories from a victimhood perspective. And so we founded like Waves to Home, which is today a global storytelling movement for refugees, migrants, displaced people. And now we also work with indigenous communities in order to give these safe spaces and re-narrate our own stories to ourselves and also inspire the world with our own resilience. So we started with a team of 11 people from different parts of the world. And ever since, we have been organizing these safe spaces in different parts of the world. We were in Malaysia, Switzerland, Italy, also recently in Canada. And we're expanding like in Sudan and also different communities around the world. And we always say that we really want to change the world like one story, one community, one country, one region at a time. And it's not like the typical storytelling in which we teach storytelling and its theory and so on. It's more like what I love to call like the spiritual storytelling, in which we dive deeper into the stories that we tell ourselves before we tell it to the world. And in that way, we change our own narrative and then we change that narrative in the world as well. Um, so yeah, we have been like working on these storytelling workshops in different parts of the world, and we call it a movement because like we are growing, and at the same time, it's a movement of beautiful people connecting in that safe space and like helping each other in different ways, getting inspired and also inspiring other people, and also like we work individually and also collectively. Like we work on an individual level because that's the inspiration where I felt in my own personal journey, and also collectively because we recognize the power of collective storytelling. So yeah, it's like many beautiful projects. It inspires me. And yeah, and also we have been doing like advocacy work, especially like because I'm half Palestinian, half Ukrainian. So in my story, I did face like double standards and selective empathy, where I felt that one part of me is being humanized, my Ukrainian side, for example, and my Palestinian side being completely dehumanized. And I have been trying to shed light on this reality in which um, how could one part of me being like empathized with from the world and welcomed by the world, and the other side being associated with being terrorists or barbarians? And then I tell the world like, hey, but I'm the same exact human. So this is the reality part of the advocacy work that I've been trying to do as well, um, and bring this message to the world that becoming refugees, it's not our choice. I did not choose to be a refugee twice. I was born with this status of being a refugee in Lebanon, a stateless Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and also becoming twice a refugee. And it's like with all of this reality, despite all of this reality, it's like I was able to re-narrate my own story and choose to see myself as someone who's fighting for justice, fighting for the collective, fighting for the freedom of people, and say that today, despite my reality, I am proud to be twice a refugee. So that's the power of storytelling. That's the power of how I was able to re narrate my own story to myself.
That's really moving. How does one of your workshops usually go?
Yes. So with the storytelling workshops, we always say that like what applied to me and what I found power in my own journey, I try to bring it to the world. So it's like the magic that you felt in your own story, you try to bring it to the world. And because in my journey, I started with my own story, so it was very much individual storytelling, and that's where I worked on re-narrating my own story. That's also how the workshop goes. It starts with like questioning the stories that we tell ourselves, because nowadays like the world is moving too fast, and we don't have like we don't take the time in order to slow down and reflect on the stories we tell ourselves on a daily basis, without even us ourselves like noticing these stories. And then how we can move to the collective in order, like in safe spaces, to share those stories. Because also when you share your pain with other people, then the pain is somehow like reduced, it gets divided. It's like it's beautiful when you share something that makes you feel alive with other people. It like amplifies it and it multiplies it with other people, it makes other feel good. But when you share the things um, that really hurt you, then other people can be empathetic. And in that safe space, somehow the pain becomes less of a pain. So that's the power of the transmission from the individual storytelling to collective storytelling. And then collectively, how we give this safe space to other people where we feel both heard and seen.
It's really powerful what you said about how the pain gets divided when you share it with someone else. And I think, like, okay, well, why is that? And I think it has to do with the feeling of not being alone. Like, I think we're supposed to be, humans are designed to be in community with one another. And I think that's where we thrive most. Is there a story that comes to your mind from someone that's been through waves of home and how their life has been, I guess, transformed in a way from the power of storytelling?
Yeah, there was Munir, who's the first storyteller. He escaped Syria because of the war, and I remember one of our like calls in this transformative like storytelling journeys. I remember him realizing suddenly, like, hey, I thought that my inner child like was dead, and now I realize like actually it is alive. So this realization with the storytelling, it really made me happy and left this huge impact on me to make someone realize like, hey, you still have so much alive inside of you. You just need to realize it, you just need to notice it, and sometimes you need another person to help you notice it. And also there's the story of Joe, who's the youngest traveler and explorer in Palestine. He is a basically a genocide survivor. Like he was in Gaza the first few months, and he was only 17 years at the time, and he was trying to find a way to evacuate his family. So imagine a child trying to evacuate his whole family. And I think like Joe left a huge impact on us, like the resilience that he has, how much he feels with the people, and how much like he is a true warrior, I would say. And he did manage to escape Gaza with his family. They evacuated. And he has been sharing his story in order to bring that reality of like what was it like to be like during the genocide in Gaza. So I think like he really impacted us a lot, especially that like we see in social media how Palestinians are being killed in Gaza, and it terrifies us. But then you don't have this direct contact one to one with a human from Gaza. And then when you have someone like Joe sharing his story and the story of the Palestinians there, you feel more connected. You feel more connected to that community, and you feel that that community is your community. And that is the role that Joe played in our lives. So maybe it's just like a reminder that being a refugee is not a choice. We don't choose to become refugees. No one wants to leave their home. And maybe like to see every refugee as a human being, despite their documents, despite the color of their eyes or the color of their skin. Like every refugee is a human, despite their background or where they come from. And it's very important to remember that and to see every refugee in that way. Because also, like, as I mentioned in my own story of like, I'm twice a refugee, and I feel like one part of me, one part of a refugee is better than the other part. And that's not true. Like the way the world treated the Ukrainians, we need to learn from that, because that is the right way to treat Ukrainians, to give them safe spaces, to give them this sense of home and hope. And this is how we need to treat everyone, whether I was coming from Ukraine, Palestine, or Yemen, or Congo, Sudan, wherever I come from. Every refugee is a human being, and every person could become a refugee one day or another. It's not only because of wars and genocides. Now, with the environment crisis that we are witnessing, anyone is at risk of becoming a refugee. So we just need to be kinder to each other and remember that we are all humans.
That's really beautifully said and a really good takeaway, I think, as we wrap up from all your experiences. But it's been like amazing talking with you. I feel so enlightened and inspired and moved by everything that you've gone through and also how you've used it as a catalyst for change and inspiration in the world. So thank you so much, Zoya. Lastly, could you just share more about where people could find you on social media and support Waves to Home if they're interested?
Yes. Maybe before I share that, I'd love to also share like my personal message, which is like, so I come from like Palestine and Ukraine, and I grew up in Lebanon. And today, three of my countries are struggling. There's a genocide in Gaza. People in West Bank are also struggling. In Lebanon, a war happening. In Ukraine, the ongoing war. So yes, I am a positive person. I'm very hopeful, but at the same time, like people struggle as well, and it's very important to realize that like there is the power of collectiveness, and that's the power that that I found, like the power in the collectiveness, that we are there for each other. And there is this message of like the internal freedom, that the genocides, the wars, they take so much from us. They could kill the people that we love or steal our homes, but then again, one thing no one can take away from us is the freedom that we have within, or us being full of life and full of stories. So that is something no one can take away from us. And I hope that we can keep that, like hold on to that hope, that no one can take our inner freedom away from us. Um, so yeah, people can find me like on social media. My full name is Zoya Miari. In Arabic it's Miari. And like we have a website, like a Waves to Home website. People can also find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and on the website, which is like wavestohome.org. So yeah.
Appreciate you so much taking the time to be on the podcast. It means really so much more than you know. And I'm excited to continue to support you in your journey and see all the impact you're going to make.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for your time and for reaching out to me. That's so kind of you to give me this safe space. So I really appreciate it.